Hello everyone, thank you for tuning into this video today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Lee. I'm a freelance journalist mainly covering housing issues to do with renters' rights. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel because I hope to put more and more of these videos out. And please watch the previous videos I've put on here. I put on there several months ago, where I've interviewed renters about why we need reform of the private rented sector. So, just to explain what I'm doing today, I'm essentially going to go through most of the Sunday papers just to see how they've covered housing news. Most of the mainstream press, that a lot of these papers I don't usually read, but I have said a number of times on my social media that the mainstream press doesn't cover renters' issues nearly as much as they should do when they talk about housing. They mainly talk about homeowners and mortgages and buy-to-let landlords and all the issues they're going through. They don't cover renters nearly enough. And I guess I wanted to look into that a bit more just to see, if my general observation is actually true. If I actually read all the papers, to see whether that's true. So I have gone through most of the papers today. Not all of them. There wasn't enough time for me to do that, but I have gone through most of them that cover a broad range of the political spectrum. So that's that. Um, Before I go into the papers individually, I just wanted to mention an interview I saw on Sky News um, with the Housing Secretary Michael Gove this morning. So he was interviewed by a journalist called Sophie Ridge, and she does this Ridge on Sunday every Sunday on Sky News, where she interviews politicians about the issues of the day. It's a pretty standard thing that's been happening for a while, and I watched the interview this morning, and Gove was asked about um, Nadeem Zahawi, who's the Tory party chairman, who's been embroiled in a row over avoiding tax. He's now been sacked, by the way. So just that just shows how fast news does move. So Gove was asked about that. He was asked about Boris Johnson because of the issues around Boris Johnson and his relationship with the BBC chair, and the BBC chair helping him get an £800,000 loan. So Gove was asked about that. When it came to his actual job, he was also asked about an interview he did with the Sunday Times today, which is the first paper we're going to look at. But just to tee this up, he was asked about cladding and what he's going to do about the cladding scandal, about how so many homes are still have unsafe cladding, and he said he was going to introduce a new law, or that says that property developers have to cover the costs of cladding, so leaseholders don't have to cover it. And he says he's going to give them a 6-week period to cover this, and if they don't, then he's going to not allow them to operate in the housing market, which I think is very good. To be fair, I'm not conservative, but I will hold my hands up and say that's actually a good policy. The other thing he was asked about is leasehold reform, which he talks about in this interview with the Sunday Times, and he actually says he wants to get rid of the whole leasehold system because it's quite a convoluted and what he calls a feudal system of home ownership, which again I can't really argue with. But what I found interesting was that Sophie Ridge didn't ask him about the Renters Reform Bill. And interestingly, back in June, he introduced a white paper for the Renters Reform Bill. And if you want to go further back, it was in 2019 the Conservatives first promised that they would scrap Section 21 no fault evictions, which, for those that don't know, are a type of eviction you can do in the UK, well, so mainly in England, I should say, where a landlord can give you an eviction notice for no reason. They do not have to give an eviction notice. That's why it's called no fault. And they can just kick you out. And a lot of tenants have been kicked out when they've complained about the state of the property, or they don't want to pay rent rise, and a landlord's just literally kicked them out. And so the government have said, look, we need to reform the renting system. We're listening to renters. We're going to do this. Theresa May first promised it. Boris Johnson did. Liz Truss, to be fair, confirmed that she's going to do it, and Rishi Sunak, 4 Tory prime ministers have promised they're going to do it. Michael Gove introduced a white paper in June, and there's been nothing. And I guess the reason I wanted Sophie Ridge to ask him about this is because it was brought up in Parliament this week. there was a backbench Labour MP called Dan Carden, who basically asked the government why are they not introducing the Renters Reform Bill in this Parliament. And a junior minister from the government said, yes, we are going to introduce it in this Parliament when parliamentary time allows. But the thing is, they've been saying this for the last almost 4 years now. It was almost 4 years ago that they promised this, and they've been saying this. It's going to be introduced in this parliament, Every parliament they've said it's going to be introduced. They've even had it in all the other Queen's speeches when the government introduces their programme of government for the year. So it was really weird that this has still not been introduced, and it was really strange that a journalist didn't Paul Michael gave up on it, because he's the one that introduced the white paper, and yet it's still been delayed, and it was brought up in Parliament this week. You'd think that a journalist who was doing their job properly, quite frankly, would ask the Housing Secretary why a key piece of housing legislation that's been promised for years hasn't been promised yet. So, yeah, I was a bit annoyed about that, and this is partly why I do this. It's partly why I talk about housing and write about it, is because there are so many issues that journalists just completely ignore. However, that came, this was obviously the broadcast press, but I'm now going to go into the newspaper press, starting with, as I promised, the Sunday Times. So I'm just going to show you the front page. So this is the front page of the Sunday Times. As you can see, it says, Gove, we share the blame for Grenfell deaths. So that is basically the headline of an interview he's done, on the front page of the Sunday Times, of an interview he's done where he talks about the cladding scandal and how lack of regulation has allowed this to happen. Successive governments, he says, we're all to blame, developers as well, and it's just, that's why he says he wants to change things, as they currently are. He wants to force the developers to introduce this now, to pay for new cladding for unsafe properties, because actually something I didn't mention was that apparently 7% of properties that have unsafe cladding on them, only 7% have had their cladding removed, which is a scandal, to be honest. And Gove wants to basically make sure that all of it is replaced, and he's going to force a law to do this. And this is what he said in the interview. Also in the interview, he said that he still wants to stick to the government target of 300,000 homes built a year, but he's not going to do it through a top-down target, because some backbencher Tory MPs basically don't like that. They don't want a top-down target from Whitehall. And by the way, we don't know what type of homes they're going to be. They just say 300,000 homes. If I was a journalist, once again, I would ask, okay, what type of homes are these going to be? And I don't feel that's asked enough, because it is important whether they're homes to buy, homes to rent, social, public, private, we need some detail here. But anyway, so there was that. And he basically said also, as I said, not, so that was, I think that was the main thing about his interview. But also in the Sunday Times comment piece on it. So they did the interviews, a couple of page spread about how wonderful Michael Gove is, and then they had a little comment piece later on in the newspaper where they said they praised him for his work on cladding, of dealing with the cladding scandal, and it's been their campaign, and they're so pleased he's backed it. Blah blah blah. How wonderful is Michael Gove? And they have also said the Tories have failed on housing when it comes to young people. Not enough young people are homeowners. And then they went on to say within this comment piece, genuinely, that a slump in ownership means there's less landlords. And actually, the reason there is less landlords are investing in property, is because there's now stamp duty on buy-to-let properties. And obviously, we need as many private landlords as possible. Clearly, we do, because there's obviously been no issues with them at all. Yeah, I mean, it just seemed a bit. It seemed a bit like, okay, we know on whose behalf you're speaking, and Sunday Times readership, given that's probably one of the more expensive Sunday papers, you can imagine, their readership is mainly homeowners and landlords. And yeah, the Sunday Times finished this comment piece on Michael Gove and the government by saying the solution is to just build more homes. Again, they don't specify what type of homes. They just said build more homes, get more young people into home ownership, blah blah blah. Um, Again, it just tinkers at the edges. It doesn't really go into renters reform or anything. And going further into the paper, they've got their home supplement as well, which their home supplement is basically just advertising. Oh, here's some homes you can buy. Um, but they also have their property editor who actually did acknowledge that there's been an increase in rents. That renters are having to bid for properties now, but the government just need to build more homes to buy, and that's gonna again that's a solution. It's just building more homes to buy, not reforming the rental market. Didn't even argue for doing that. Just went, oh yeah, rents are high. There's a lot of competition even to rent now, so you need to build more homes to buy, and that's how the Tories will win back young voters. It's just so out of touch. Like they've introduced so many different schemes to help to buy, haven't they? And it's just not worked. And just simply building more homes, yes, we need more homes, of course, but it's just not the overall solution. And it's a lack of an imagination on the part of the Times that they would, that they would just go homes to buy. That's it. Um, and yeah, just going into another section of the Sunday Times is business and money section. House builders call for revival of Help to Buy. They've already been doing this. It's not going to do anything. They've said, they want top-down housing targets, so clashing with a lot of Tory MPs there. But they also, this is a weird thing that apparently house builders, i.e. developers, have said, that they want a relaxation of rules of nutrients levels in rivers. So where they build, basically, at the moment, I think rivers are protected, and so house builders have to ensure that they don't get loads of shit in rivers. Given that we've had a lot of problem with shit in our rivers, apparently they want a relaxation of those rules, which again, it's just a bit. I don't understand that. It's just all regulation is bad, and this is what really got me. Was that allowed? I mean, this is what I genuinely thought that the press did, and it kind of confirms it. You know, it says buy to regret. So a landlord that owns 10 properties has been really struggling with high interest rates because interest rates have been going up for buy to let landlords, and he's struggling, but fair play to him, he's not going to pass on his costs to his tenants because they're struggling as well. So all praise to him. This poor landlord, 10 properties, he's really struggling. I mean, I'd love to own even one property, mate, let alone 10. So, again, and this is just really confirms a sort of, you know, the bias that the press has when it comes to talking about housing. However, so I was reading Sunday Times, just getting like, oh yeah, typical Times, of course they're going to do this. However, they did then, when I went further into the Times, they did then have a spread on renters where they literally did interview renters, and it shocks me, to be honest, because I did not think they were going to do this. Now, I knew they were one of the more moderate right wing papers, but I did not know that they would actually do a whole spread on renters, and they did. To be fair, um, they said soaring prices, damp walls. This is renting in 2023. Who want to be a renter? Yeah, very true. And just some of the things that this article, two-page spread article in the Sunday Times, it pointed out that there's 6 people often competing for every property. There's been 10% price increases recently. Renters are paying more than a third of their income in rent, sometimes over 50%. There's 4.6 million private rental properties in England. Most renters are under 44. They actually pay a higher proportion of their income than homeowners do when it comes to mortgages. Um, and private rental sector is more unsafe than social housing or owner occupied. 25% of homes not meeting decent home standards. 40% of rental properties have mould in them. 17% of renters wait more than a month for maintenance issues to be addressed. Um, and then the article goes on to say that it acknowledges that the government's going to introduce renters reform. This is the first time I've seen this bill mentioned in a paper for a while, so fair play to them. But apparent a Department for Housing spokesperson said the work is underway to create a private renters ombudsman, which will allow renters to address issues they're having with their landlords. I don't know what that's gonna do exactly. There wasn't much detail there. And they said obviously there's now a lack of rental properties. The number of homes to rent has fallen by 41% since 2019. Tenants pay between 6 and 12 months rent up front. So this is a thing now when you try to rent, particularly in London, this is what you pay. You end up paying 6 months rent in advance. Rents have increased by 10%. They interviewed someone who's a person in Clapham, a renter in Clapham. They're moving due to a 20% rise in their rents. And they said there was one room that had 30 applicants. Obviously, they've said, in this article, there needs to be more supply to reduce rents. I think it's more than that, as I said before. They also said housing stock reducing further as renting properties becomes less profitable. So this is where they've gone, oh, but what about landlords? Yeah, landlords are making less profit, so that's why there's less properties. Again, it's like they seem to cover this well. Go, yeah, renters are facing so many problems. But this is because landlords are facing so many problems. It's just, you're almost getting it, guys, but you're not quite getting it. And it's because apparently, yeah, landlords are investing less because buy-to-let rate is going from 2% to 6%. 41% of landlords are apparently going to reduce their property portfolio. Rising mortgage costs are blamed for landlords not doing repair work. So again, they're letting landlords off the hook there. It's annoying because they're acknowledging the problems. The Sunday Times, to be fair, are acknowledging the problems, but then they're kind of going, well, it's just because we tax landlords too much and we just need more homes and that will solve everything. Come on, guys, it's more than that. So yeah, I mean there's some other obviously um, there's some other interviews they do. I'm not going to go into detail because I'm aware this video is now 17 minutes long, but yeah, I found that very, very interesting. Actually, that Sunday Times had a two-page spread on renters. That's the first time I've seen something like that. Because I do buy the Sunday Times quite a lot because it does have good investigative journalism in there. Um, but yeah, that was their coverage. It started off with just woe is me landlords, and then it actually then gave some decent coverage to the issues renters are facing. Um, so now we've done the Sunday Times. I'm now actually so I'm I did say that I bought today's papers, but I was in the shop yesterday and I saw the front page of the Guardian, yesterday's Guardian, and very interesting. Another front page which actually pertains to housing. So it said UK for sale, offshore link to thousands of properties. So this is a story that's covered in The Guardian that basically says that there's a lot of rich people that own properties via an offshore account. And this includes the BBC chair. This includes Yoko Ono. That's a very interesting one. Lewis Hamilton. A lot of Gulf states like Qatar, the Saudis, China, own this as well. And these are just like commercial and retail property, and apparently there's a lot of Tory donors. I think it's about 10 Tory donors are mentioned here. It's a 10 donors to the Conservative Party are mentioned of owning property through 150 offshore trusts. I mean that is incredible. I mean that is a really interesting news story. And it's because the government have actually increased transparency when it comes to offshore holdings. Um, that's a good thing that they've done actually. And I guess this does also explain why a lot of rents are high, because if they're owned by rich people via offshore accounts, they want to make much money as possible. I mean, The Guardian didn't make this link, but I would certainly make that link, to be honest. And I mean, to be fair, this was covered on the front page, the second page, and pages 8 and 9. So absolutely fair play to the Guardian for that. Um, really, really interesting news site. You can get that online for free, so I would look that up if you want to read more details. I've just summarised that. So that was one of the Saturday papers I've covered. I haven't covered the other Saturday papers, but the next paper I'm going on to, and this is the first time I've bought this paper. To be honest, I say first time in years. When I was a lot younger, I did actually buy this paper because there was a free CD inside that I wanted. And I didn't even read the paper, but I bought it just for that. But this is the first time in years I've bought this paper. But I did say I would do this. So this is the front page of the Mail on Sunday. Now, the front page is King to Welby. I want Harry at coronation. Obviously, the Mail just love the royals. Basically, we know that they're obsessed with the royals. What a surprise! They cover what the king says about wanting Harry at his coronation. So, yeah, what do the Mail cover in terms of housing? Now, this goes back. This actually does reinforce some of the things I already thought. Um, yeah, they do actually have a wealth and personal finance section where they just give mortgage rates. They advertise different mortgage rates with different banks, including buy to let. Um, and apparently, if you go to a variable rate, you can save £2,000 a year. Apparently, I mean, who can even get a mortgage? um, and yeah, they've just got a table of this as well, and it's just it doesn't really cover much, to be honest. And the only other time they even briefly mentioned something to do with housing is apparently um, Kate Middleton. I think she's Duchess of Cambridge. I don't really follow the royals that much, but she mentioned something about intervening early on in children's lives to make sure they have a fulfilling childhood, and apparently this could also be linked to issues like addiction or homelessness. So homelessness was mentioned as an issue that a lot of children face, which okay, she's acknowledged that, and she's going to campaign on that issue to help children have a better life start. But and she mentioned that homelessness is one of the issues. But yeah, obviously doesn't go more into it than that. But yeah, that's basically. Oh yeah, sorry, I wanted to say another thing as well. This actually made me laugh a lot. So actually on the celebrity gossip column page of the Mail, there was apparently Emily Prescott, who writes this gossip column, actually said that there was these celebrities. I forgot their name. I can't be bothered to remember them. It's not important. But these celebrities apparently they bought an art gallery in the area of London, St James, and yeah, they're really they can't afford a home there. These are rich. These are very wealthy celebrities. I think one of them's a daughter of an advertising executive. Um, and yeah, and apparently they cannot afford a property in St James because they want a property in walking distance of the art gallery they own. My heart bleeds for them. It really does. I mean, I know what they're going through. I know what they're going through. It's just yeah. So it's a celebrity gossip thing. So I wasn't expecting anything there, but I saw that and I thought, oh, they can't buy a property where there are literally palaces. So what? That's not really news. But again, it's celebrity gossip, so obviously they're going to have that there. Um, and that really was about it for the Mail. Sorry, I'm just sorting out because I did write notes and all this. So the next, and I have never bought this paper, and actually I do apologise to Liverpool fans in particular for this, but this is part of my job as a journalist to analyse the press, so that's my excuse. Um, the Sun on Sunday, their headline today: Strictly stars in 3 a.m. bottle bust up. Yep, there we go. So celebrities getting pissed. It's not like, guys, it's not like there's anything else going on at the moment. We're not living in a cost of living crisis. So yeah, just have some bullshit about celebrities, but it is the Sun, so what do you expect? And yeah, so the notes I made on this, um, yeah, there was a report on. Yeah, so they basically reported on there's a healthcare plan that the government want to introduce where they want more people treated at home to relieve stress on A&Es. Where you can get treated at home, basically you should. Essentially, that's what they're saying, and they're going to invest more in community care, which is what Labour have said. Interestingly enough, so I don't think that's a bad idea. If someone can be treated at home, if the facilities there, then why not? Um, I don't actually think that's a bad idea. Obviously, I don't agree with what the government have been doing for the NHS for like the last 13 years, but this isn't actually a bad idea. I mean, that's to do with housing, I guess. But then, if your housing is actually causing your health problems, which a lot of people's housing does, in fact, the NHS spend millions of year actually treating people that have had health issues related to housing, according to the National Audit Office. So actually it could be people's homes that are actually causing their health issues. So getting treated at home may not be right for a lot of people. But yeah, that's all the Sun really covered. Um, so that's that. I'm now going to go through to the Observer. So very very much changing tack here. Went through a few right wing papers and going to the bog standard centre left newspaper, the Observer, which is the Sunday's Guardian basically. And so their front page today: I saw children face bullying and racism at Asylum Hotel. Actually, to be fair, that is actually a really important story because it's about how migrant children are treated and processed in asylum centres, and obviously they're treated appallingly. And I think the hostile environment has just been. It's absolutely disgusting what the government have done there. And so, yeah, genuinely, that is a very interesting story. And so yeah, what in terms of housing, what the Observer covered? Um, the cladding story, the cladding announcement from Michael Gove, they have covered that a bit. They interviewed someone, a leaseholder that is still waiting 6 years for their cladding to be there's 6 years for their cladding to be replaced. Actually, saying that though, they haven't. Sorry, I did note here they haven't actually um said anything about Go's announcement about the legal requirement he's going to ask of developers, which does show, doesn't it, how some papers do have more access to ministers than others. I think that's very interesting that they didn't cover that. Maybe they didn't have access to his office, or maybe his office didn't want to say anything to them because they're the Guardian or the Observer in this case. In terms of what else they've covered, so I had to go to all the way to page 36 to see anything in more on housing, and there was a letter to the Guardian, Dr. Stephen Battersea, I think I've written here, and he says basically hundreds of thousands of public and private homes have problems with mould. We need proper investment in environmental health teams and a crackdown on property owners that don't treat this problem properly, and actually that will reduce strain on the NHS. It's what I mentioned before actually about how much the NHS actually spends treating people with problems in their home, and it's not just private housing, it's public housing as well. And actually, environmental health teams in various councils have been massively cut back, and this obviously means people get more health problems with their homes when they have mould, and obviously a lot of people don't report this because they could get evicted, which is why rental reform is actually incredibly important. Um, but yeah, a very important letter just to actually remind us that a lot of people's health conditions are related to their home they live in. Um, and yeah, what else have I put here? I'm just trying to read my own writing there. See, I wrote down notes on all this, and yeah, so Philip Inman, on page 42 of The Guardian, highlights interest rates, how it's hitting homeowners. Yeah, I think a lot of papers do cover this when it comes to home ownership and mortgages, interest rates rise, especially in relation to what Kwasi Kwarteng did. That has hit a lot of mortgages, and it is news. A lot of mortgage holders, it does hit them, and I do understand that. It is news. A lot of people are mortgage holders as well as renters, so I do understand that is news. But yeah, it's what a lot of papers are covering. It's not really unique to the Observer. And actually, very interestingly, there's a kind of your problems page. So there's obviously a columnist that responds to people writing in. Um, and there was this particular problem that someone had their landlord not making repairs on their property. This woman lived with her mum, who was really ill, had cancer, and their ceiling caved in 11 months after they reported cracks in the ceiling, and this landlord just didn't do anything about it. And their home got flooded. They were moved from temporary accommodation to temporary accommodation over 15 months, and yeah, and then her mother ended up dying basically, and she can't go to get her belongings and her property now because the landlord still hasn't repaired the property properly. It's still, and she's still having to go from place to place. She's living with friends now. She's on antidepressants, and I suppose this kind of really does highlight how bad the private rented sector can be, or how bad rented sector can be in general, whether it's social or private or council homes. It's Yeah, sometimes the landlords just do not care and they just don't want to do anything. Interestingly, this landlord is called L&Q, and they started off as a charitable housing association in the 60s. Now they're a profit making property developer. So yeah, they've obviously really neglected a lot of tenants. Um, and this is just a really sad story, but it just highlights once again the state of the housing sector. So fair play to Guardian, they've covered this. I think it could have been further, in the paper. It could have been in the first few pages, because that is a harrowing tale, and that actually does highlight how bad the private rented sector is. So they have covered it, the Observer, but it could have been more prominent. Um, so that is that one done. Sorry, I'm just dealing with my notes. First time I've ever done this video, so I might be umming and ahhing a lot, but hopefully you're finding this interesting. And then we've got the weekend. So I did buy this one yesterday because, yeah, it covers over 2 days. And the front page of this one is Brexit regrets, growing but UK not eager to rejoin the EU. So it's the news how basically more and more people are regretting Brexit, but they don't want to rejoin apparently. Um, Yeah, I mean, Brexit is still the new. It is still in the news, obviously, because we've left and there are issues with it. I'm not going to go into that in detail. As I said, I'm covering housing, um, and yeah, what I can find in the eye in terms of housing is there was a story about HS2 on page 6, and actually did force a lot of the building of HS2, the high speed rail project that's been delayed and delayed for years, did actually force out a lot of people in Camden, and there's now talk that the government aren't even going to um, take it all the way to Euston, and so it did force people out of their homes. So that was on page 6. Um, so yeah, and then there was actually the political editor Paul War, or I don't know how you pronounce his name, political editor of the Eye. Um, he mentioned Liz Truss in his he wrote a comment piece, said she's wise to keep quiet due to her impact on mortgage holders from her policies. Um, Interestingly, he doesn't mention the fact that actually, in her brief period as Prime Minister, it was mooted to the Sunday Times, I believe, that they were going to not scrap Section 21 evictions. She confirmed they were, but they put out to the Sunday Times that it wasn't going to be. So she screwed over mortgage holders. She also, kind of provided unease for renters who thought she was going to scrap the proposed reforms. So I found that interesting that a sort of like centre-left newspaper didn't mention the fact that she threatened to scrap reforms of the private rented sector. Um, yeah, so there was a cost of living report on page 33 on the weekend, said that 44% of households struggling with housing related costs. Um, this is from November 2022, and this jumped from 26% in January 21. So as I said, on page 39 of the Independent, um, there's a news that apparently it's been a good week for house builder Resro, as they um, decided to fit detached homes with air source heat pumps instead of gas boilers. So yeah, that was quite interesting that the eye didn't really cover any housing details um, in detail, because they do actually have a good housing correspondent who I have mentioned before on my blog. So that was the eye. so there wasn't a lot there, to be honest, other than mentioning the cost of living crisis and increased housing costs in general, which obviously is affecting all of us renters and people that have mortgages. So now we go on to sort of another sort of centre-left newspaper, the Sunday Mirror. So the headline here is Top Tories, Russian Oil Millions. So this is obviously the news that Tory donors get money from rich Russians. I mean, that's been news for years. Everyone's known about that for years. Why that's new news, I don't know, but there we are. So in terms of what they've covered in housing, goes comments on Grenfell about the new cladding laws he's going to bring in. That's again something I mentioned before. But interesting, they do mention that they're in relation to Zahari, who's been avoiding tax, who I mentioned before, he has now been sacked for essentially avoiding tax. He actually owns properties where small business owners have actually had to liquidate their businesses because his company was demanding unpaid rent. So yeah, so it's not just obviously people individually out to struggle and pay rent. It's also small business owners as well. And if the Tory party chairman's company is like demanding unpaid rent when they've been struggling over the pandemic, that's a pretty dodgy thing. That definitely does need to be mentioned. Obviously, as I said, the Mirror is sort of a centre-left newspaper, so clearly it is going to be biased against the government. Um, so there's also a report in the Mirror on Sunak's pledge to have more healthcare treated at home. That's something that was mentioned. That's been mentioned in a few of the papers today. Um, there is a story on page 20 about how a housing association gave a 50 quid Asda voucher to an old woman whose house burnt down, basically, as compensation. um, yeah, I mean that's pretty bad, to be honest, and it kind of reiterates what I said before about the conditions in private and social housing are pretty bad in this country. So it's a problem that affects a lot of renters, and so I think it's important to highlight these issues. But they don't really mention much more than that. So now let's go back to the right. Um, so now we've got the Sunday Express. Guess what they're going to cover in their front page? Rishi at war over migrants. So obviously, the whole thing about they don't like migrants, asylum seekers that are coming over here. They want to crack down on them more. Obviously, the Express is going hard on that because that's what they mainly care about. Um, again, so in terms of housing news, what they mention is again they mention Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, talking about helping children deal with her campaign to help children get a better start in life by dealing with issues like homelessness. That same thing mentioned in the Mail. Um, they actually have a full article from Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, over the government's plans to have more healthcare at home and in the community. Again, this has been covered across the papers. Um, but they also have a story on page 52. The property prices fall for a fifth month in a row as demand picks back up because of slightly lower interest rates. So again, covering basically people with mortgages, and they're also advertising different mortgage rates as well. So yeah, a few of the papers obviously do have quite a lot of advertising in them because that's how they make their revenue, and so they do stuff like this. And this is the thing with the Daily Express, it's mainly the people that mainly read it are older people that already own their own homes, so clearly they're not going to cover renters issues a lot. So I didn't expect anything different from them, but that's where we are. And so we come to the last paper. This has been a 40-minute video, so thank you so much for watching if you watched all the way through. The last paper I'm going to cover today is the Sunday Telegraph, and they have a sort of house-related story on the front page. It's hospitals at home plans to save the NHS. So this was the story I mentioned before about the fact that the government want more healthcare at home. Um, I'm not going to go into it, to be honest, because it's pretty self-explanatory. So people with some conditions that can be treated at home will be treated at home. It's quite a good policy. Actually, something I did want to share also on the front page is that because obviously they've got quite a big front page, they've also, the other things they're covering are hypocritical Starmer benefited from private school charity, even though the school he went to didn't turn into a private school until after he was already there. So non-story there, and of course the whole um, surgeon under fire, second trans inmate sent to women's jail. This is a whole scaremongering culture war over trans people that a lot of the right wing press do want to talk about, because obviously they want to deflect from the government's failings. So that is basically it in terms of the papers. Thank you so much for watching. As I said, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, and please do follow me on Twitter at journalism. I also have a blog called rentersright.substack.com where you can see a lot more articles and interviews with renters about the state of the rented sector, which a lot of the press don't cover. Interestingly enough, one of them did have a whole spread on renters today, so that was a pleasant surprise. But yeah, I'm hoping to do more of these, depending on how well this video does. It will probably be done once a month, I imagine, because this does cost time and money. Obviously, buying all these papers costs a lot of money, and it does take a lot of time as well. Um, Also, I'm going to advertise the link to my Ko-Fi page if you want to chuck me some money for doing this. I know I'm some random journalist that a lot of people don't know yet, but like I said, this does cost me a lot of time and money. So if you're able to chuck me a few quid, I know times are hard, but if you're able to, that would be fantastic. And and if nothing else, do share this with your friends and family, because the more we talk about, the press's coverage on certain issues, the more we can hold them to account on actually talking about more issues that affect a wider range of people, including many renters. As I said, a lot of renters don't get a lot of coverage in the mainstream press. It was good to see that in the Sunday Times today, and it did genuinely surprise me. But unfortunately, a lot of the other press didn't cover a lot of things as I expected. I was even surprised, with the Guardian and Observer not having more prominent stories. But that's the press can surprise you like that. So thank you for watching. Do share, do subscribe to the channels, to this channel, to my blog, and to Twitter. And I'll probably see you all in about another month. Okay, bye.